Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Aloud at Central Library. I'm Louise Steinman, the curator of the Aloud series. So tonight, with writers Bernard Cooper, George Saunders, and Sarah Shun-lien Bynum, we explore writing and the art of not knowing. Or we might say, what don't we know, why don't we know it, and why does it matter? As invocation to this evening, I thought I would read a line from a George Saunders story, which was quoted in Joel Lavell's recent beautiful profile of Saunders in the New York Times Magazine. Don't be afraid to be confused. Try to remain permanently confused. Anything is possible. Stay open, forever so open it hurts, and then open up some more until the day you die, world without end, amen. So let's just say, thank you, George. Let's just say it's okay if you came in confused tonight and remain confused when you leave. After all, anything is possible with these writers whose work in both fiction and nonfiction is noted for stealthy humor, brilliant invention, unsparing honesty, and deep compassion. George Saunders, a MacArthur Grant Fellow, is the acclaimed author of several collections of short stories, including Pastoralia and Civil War Land in Bad Decline, as well as a collection of essays and a book for children. He teaches in the creative writing program at Syracuse University, and his most recent work is a collection of short stories, or as one critic called them, dark morality tales, called 10th of December. Bernard Cooper, the recipient of many awards, has written two collections of memoirs, Maps to Anywhere and Truth Serum, as well as a novel, A Year of Rhymes, and a collection of short stories, Guess Again. He is the author of The Bill from My Father, a memoir. Bernard's inheritance from his father was an invoice for $2 million, and it's really hard to make that up. That book was David Sedaris' selection for 2012. Bernard is currently completing a collection of essays under the working title, My Avant-Garde Education, excerpts from which will be featured in a forthcoming Granta magazine issue. And he teaches in the writing programs at Bennington College and USC. And Sarah Shun-lien Bynum, our moderator tonight, is the author of two novels, Ms. Hempel's Chronicle and Madeline is Sleeping. Her fiction has appeared in many magazines and anthologies, and she is the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award and an NEA Fellowship, and she teaches in the graduate writing program at Otis College of Art and Design. So with great pleasure, please join me in welcoming George Saunders, Bernard Cooper, and Sarah Shun-lien Bynum to the LA Public Library.
Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight with these brilliant writers. I'm going to read something very short from a book that is forthcoming at some distant future date from Norton. By way of preface, I've been a lifelong insomniac. And one night at about 3:30 in the morning, I decided that I would speak for insomniacs everywhere and write the Insomniac Manifesto. I had just been reading a lot of artists' manifestos, including this incredible document of contemporary art history, which is the Futurist Manifesto by an Italian artist named Filippo Marinetti. And it's from 1909. And I tried to adopt some of his homicidal irritation and enthusiasm when I wrote this. So here it is, the Insomniac Manifesto. Sleep is the opiate of the masses, a retreat from the teeth-grinding and ceaseless thinking that is our true calling as humans. What use is a body sprawled on cotton, as still as a statue? We who toss and turn each night, we sentries fretting in the moonlight say, deep sleepers everywhere, awake. Rise from your beds, free yourself from the stranglehold of blankets. Shed your flimsy bedclothes and don a scratchy woolen suit, chafing shoes and belts and watch bands, the glorious clothes of consciousness. Dreams are nothing more than deception. You hold the winning lottery ticket. The dead one returns to your arms at last. The exam is passed with flying colors. The speech delivered even though you are nude. O dozers and catnappers and denizens of nod, you must turn your backs on the illusory satisfactions of the dream life. Surrender yourself to churning worry, to indecision, to doubts as bright and numberless as stars. warm milk, bounding sheep, a fresh prescription for Ambien. Where have they gotten you? Half your life squandered, time that would have been better spent regretting the past and dreading the future. Think of it if you're not too groggy. You might have constructed, grain by monotonous, painstaking grain, a mountain out of a molehill. You say you need your 40 winks? Go ahead and make excuses, each as thin as a well-worn sheet. A life where pale dawns are lost is no life at all. We, the bleary-eyed, the perpetually restless, the not for a moment seduced by sleep, we tell you there's light in pots of black coffee, high adventure while pacing the floor. While others slumber, insensible, we urge you to make yourself irate by recalling old slights. To see the unstoppable progress of time by studying your face in the bathroom mirror. To embrace the terrors of kidnap, plane crash, and coronary by watching late-night TV. You must make your palates from brittle straw. You must fling your limbs at uncomfortable angles, each less conducive to sleep than the next. You must picture the mites, mandibles and all, who inhabit your mattress. Listen, rousing new tunes have replaced the quaint music of crickets, the mumbling of doves on a window ledge, the rain's drowsy, insistent whisper. Gunshots, sirens, car alarms, raging dogs, squalling babies, couples fucking like wildebeests. Why disregard this wealth of noise for a meager lease on oblivion? What you hear is an anthem throbbing through the walls. Stand up, comrades. Look alive. We must reconsider the meaning of sleep. We must think again and again and again.
Thank you. I want to join your club. I'm ready. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you two and to have prepared for this by reading your work, and it's really charming. So thanks. So I haven't read this one publicly before, so it's just a kind of a set piece from a longer deal. And I don't think you need to know much except it's kind of a diary entry, so there's a lot of truncations, and in the text there's a lot of typographical things. But anyway, this is just a father of a couple kids, and this is what happens in a couple days at his work. September 30th. Sorry for silence. Crazy thing happened this week. Monday, Todd Grassberger died. Future readers know Todd. Have I mentioned? Probably have not mentioned. Todd, not close friend, just work colleague. Todd and I had running joke, I had never returned Firewire I had borrowed. In fact, was company Firewire, not his. He knew. I knew he knew. It was just our joke. Day started out fine, beautiful Indian summer day, fire drill in morning, whole complex emptied into outdoor courtyard. Day so beautiful, no one minded. Everyone lounging on berms, urging caution. Fun to see people of different companies, like seeing members of different tribes. Nabromax equal nerds, calculating temperature needed to destroy by fire entire complex. Urged equal design firm, has many hippies, prettiest girls. Many urged folks lying on backs on beams, looking at berms, looking up at clouds. One guy playing small wood flute. When all clear sounded, everyone booed. All filed sadly back inside. Then at 2, word rippled through office. Todd dead. Had heart attack at dry cleaner. Just now, during lunch. All afternoon, no one working. Everyone stunned, milling around, trying to process fact that Todd equal dead. Under Todd's desk, pair of hiking boots. Against one wall, walking stick Todd used to take on lunchtime walks in woods. Weird sun shower around 3. Linda Hurtney, it's like a final goodbye from Todd. Linda equal nut. Once claimed crow on ledge was reincarnation of her dead husband. Said she could tell by way crow's head was cocked disapprovingly at large lunch she was eating. Then storm over, parking lot glistening. All evening found myself looking afresh at Pam, kids. Everything suddenly precious. Said prayer before dinner. Do not usually pray before dinner, but tonight held hands, prayed. Prayed we would be grateful for our good fortune, grateful for each other. Prayed we would remember that various ups, downs we may experience as family equal small bumps in road compared with this. Prayed for Todd, prayed for Todd's family. Just nights ago, Todd was in own house, doing whatever Todd did at night, taking change out of pockets, having laugh with kids, petting dog, thinking of future, tossing dirty clothes in hamper. Where is Todd tonight? October 1st. Todd Grasberger funeral today at Ukrainian church downtown. Todd apparently from humble roots. Priest equal long-haired guy in cassock. Sings chants whole service in Ukrainian from memory. As he chants, paces, cassock rope swings. Scary guy, very intense. Sermon, why this surprising? Did you think you were going to live forever? Only difference between you sitting there anticipating the rest of your day and Todd in coffin, bound for eternal home in cold earth, is heartbeat. Feel that, people? In your chest? That is thin line between you and grave. So why do you live like you're eternal? That foolish, you are fools. This scary, this not scary, this truth, this reality. Shouts, shall we wake up? Shall we? Everyone staring big-eyed at priest. Except usual congregants who seem to have heard all before. Priest goes on, which of us will die tonight? Do we think he's being facetious? That shows we are dopes. Any one of us could die tonight. Die right now. Suddenly come up short of breath, keel over in pew, be with Todd in earth in wink of eye. Suddenly from downstairs, kitchen, smell of roast beef. Happy chatter from church ladies down in kitchen. Smell of roast beef plus sound of pots clanking, plates being set out equal appealing. People shifting in pews due to amazing smell of beef. Todd's 2 brothers come to lectern, make tributes. Older brother, Todd sweet, Todd funny, Todd a powerful force in his life. Will never forget wonder that was Todd. Younger brother, yes, Todd, super strong person. Todd equal bull. Although Todd could be somewhat firm, Todd did younger brother much good in long run by teaching him how to stand up for himself. That is to say, having been pushed around by Todd throughout entire childhood, nothing can now faze younger brother, i.e., no bully in outside world will ever be equal of Todd. But Todd's so great, Todd the best. Todd's so smart, so good looking, no wonder Todd's mom plus dad always treated him, younger brother, like afterthought. But Todd's so caring, so perceptive, Todd understood this, would sometimes console younger brother by saying that he, younger brother, was perfectly fine in own way. Often just before breaking pact they had made RE Wednesday night being younger brother's night to borrow dad's car, thereby ruining younger brother's chance to see girl he really liked, possible love of life, girl he eventually lost to dope from Selden, dope whose own older brother apparently more inclined than Todd to give his younger brother decent shot at family car. Todd's younger brother, breathless, pauses at lectern, can't seem to stop self, plunges ahead. But Todd great, Todd so great, Todd will surely be missed. Todd taught everyone in family an important lesson. Although a person might be strong, bellicose, ambitious, slightly blind to need of others, still, that does not mean person not greatest, most amazing brother ever, who occasionally, as if to spite self, might suddenly, surprising all, do some reasonably thoughtful thing. Younger brother, seemingly perplexed by own tribute, then led away from lectern by scowling older brother, hissing something in undertone. Todd's widow approaches lectern, can't seem to speak. 3 little girls clinging to her skirt. Widow hands microphone to smallest girl. Smallest girl, bye, Daddy. Lunch good. Lunch beyond good. Funeral so sad, lunch equal heaven. Eat 3 roast beef sandwiches in row off paper plate. Outside yellow tree blowing in wind. Single yellow leaf blows in through open basement window. Watch it come down, land near my shoe. Think, life beautiful. So glad I'm not dead. If when I die, do not want Pam lonely. Want her to remarry, have full life. As long as new husband is nice guy. Gentle guy. Religious guy. Very caring, plus good to kids. But kids not fooled. Kids prefer dead dad, i.e. me, to religious guy. Pale, boring, religious guy with no oomph, who wears weird sweaters and is always a little sad due to cannot get boner, due to physical ailment. Death very much on my mind tonight, future reader. Can it be true that I will die, that Pam, kids will die? Is awful. Why were we put here, so inclined to love, when end of our story equal death? That harsh, that cruel, do not like. Note to self, try harder in all things to be better person. Thanks.
Fantastic.
You too. Based on a true story.
Thank you both. All I can say is Bernard Cooper, George Saunders equals readerly bliss. And I couldn't be more giddy and more delighted to be here with 2 writers whose works I love so much.
Likewise.
So I'm going to dive in and go straight to the big questions and tackle the title that we came up with for this conversation. Bernard, you've spoken about being drawn to writing because it offers that element of surprise, of intuition, of unpredictability, of taking off in directions you can't foresee. And George, you recently described on the Charlie Rose show the writing process in this way. You said, you go in trying not to have any idea of what you're going to accomplish, praying that you'll accomplish something. So much of the job is to show up every day and say, I really don't know. So my first question, and it's a big one, is how do you achieve and maintain this state of not knowing? This state that for both of you seems almost a precondition for writing?
I don't know. All right, we got that one out of the way. Now we can move on to the higher ground, hopefully. So.
I actually don't feel that it's something I have to try for or achieve. I honestly feel that bewilderment is kind of my native state. And there are times where you do have to push self-consciousness out of the way. And I definitely feel that if something starts to seem too predictable, I shy away from it. In fact, recently John Cage is not one of my favorite composers, but his ideas about music, about moving beyond his own aesthetics are really interesting and constantly surprising himself. So I try to do that. I sort of naturally veer toward that path.
We were kind of joking around at dinner, that one of the things you learn as a writer is you get your shtick together, and you have quotes. But there's one that I love so much that I overuse it, but it's this Gerald Stern thing where he says, if you start out to write a poem about 2 dogs fucking, and you write a poem about 2 dogs fucking, then you wrote a poem about 2 dogs fucking. And then the sort of slightly higher toned one is that Einstein said, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. So when I say not knowing, it's not so much that I don't know. I have a lot of ideas, and anytime you start something, the ball starts rolling along a certain track. But then, as you said, Bernard, the trick is to kind of push those demons back a little bit, because the fear would be that you'd say, oh, I'm going to do A, and then you would just merely do it. And I think a perceptive, intelligent reader is always a little bit ahead of you. So if you start to suggest this direction, she'll already be there, kind of waiting, like, really? Are you really coming where I thought you were coming? And that's where boredom comes from. So for me, the trick is to kind of, in this weird way, interact with your imagined reader such that she sees you going left and you go a little farther left. Or she sees you going left and you say, I could, but I'm actually going this way. And I think that's a form of respect. It's a form of intimacy, to sort of anticipate and then enhance in real time.
I mean, reading all of your stories, but your most recent book, I love the fact that I was constantly thrown off balance. And as soon as the prose seemed to settle into one direction, I was brought up short or surprised. And it was this constant engagement of being involved with a narrative that was not predictable. And I love that as a reader. So,
yeah, it's interesting to think that the whole thing is kind of a process where you're really crediting the reader, and then just trying to, almost like boxing, you're kind of trying to fake, then do this, but it implies that the person is really smart, and that their concerns are similar to yours, and so therefore it's knowable. You can know what they're expecting, and then you can just give them a little more on top of it. But for me, that process, and I'd be interested to know if this is true, but for me it's iterative. Like I have to do it so many times, go through the draft so many times to even sort of see what the prose is starting to do, and then you can kind of do the thing of complicating it, Yeah.
Well, being willing to complicate it, being willing to write from a state of bewilderment, can be daunting. As you said, as part of that great Charlie Rose interview, that writing from that place can be exhilarating, but also sometimes very scary.
Yeah.
How do you manage the doubt and the fear that comes from anticipating your reader, or from being open to possibilities? How can doubt sort of be a constructive force or a catalyst, and at any point has it ever threatened to become something destructive or paralyzing?
Oh, no.
it is paralyzing sometimes. What's really helped me, the three of us were talking earlier about how often we quoted the writer Flannery O'Connor. And we were all sort of, spouting our favorite quotes. And it was incredibly important for me as a writer to hear her say, well, first of all, that she was like a little old lady who didn't know what she was going to say until she said it. And specifically, she talks about a story we all admire called Good Country People, where a Bible salesman steals a woman's wooden leg after he sleeps with her in the hayloft. And O'Connor said that she didn't know that was going to happen until I think he said it was 4 lines before it happened in the story. And it was such a relief for me to and has been consistently. I almost collect quotes where writers talk about, this great Henry James quote, which is on the flyer for this, about working in the dark. And knowing that other people have found their way, even when they didn't quite know what they were doing, is really helpful. And also to expect a sense that you're going to be off balance when you're writing.
I had one time, before my first book came out, I was in this really low place where nothing was working out, and I thought, maybe I'm a songwriter. Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong. So I went to this seminar. There's a guy named Mike Smith who wrote a beautiful song called The Dutchman that was done by Steve Goodman back in the 70s. A great song. So he was doing these songwriting seminars in people's houses, and he said to us, here's what you do. You write a song, and then you put on your hero, or work by your hero. Say Dylan. And everybody groaned. Oh, no, I'm not going to do it. He said, no. He said, you should do it. You put on your song, you put on his, and you feel that pain. Yeah. And he went, yeah, we do. And he said, no. He said, that is such a great thing. He said, because if your work can turn your stomach, it means that you still have taste. Right? And we were kind of still thinking, well, that doesn't. Then he said, no. And he was totally serious. He said, but then that's like the trail of breadcrumbs. Yeah. If you read your story and you read Flannery O'Connor, you go, oh, shit. Then in that moment, there's a chance for you to go, oh, okay, I now perceive in an instant the difference between me and Flannery O'Connor. And then that is actually the path to revision. So what you asked about doubt, and I think that's really, doubt is your good taste asserting itself. Really, it is. And so then that's not a terrible thing unless, sometimes I teach at Syracuse, and sometimes young writers think if the first draft is no good, you go off to law school because you can't do it. Yeah. But then I think as you get older, you say, well, the first draft is just what you throw down. that's what you work on, then the doubt is just kind of almost like an arrow saying, well, go this way, you know, go towards Dylan, idiot, you know. Yeah.
I think envy too. I mean, a lot of times when my students talk with a certain despair about reading something that's so beautiful or so powerful and feeling that they could never achieve that, I try to remind them, even though I despair myself sometimes, that kind of envy can be really productive, that it can keep you striving to do this thing you think you're barely capable of doing, and that's not a bad thing.
Do other readers' good taste ever play a role in your process? But you've, George, spoken very movingly about Paula, your wife's role as your first reader, and Bernard, I know you have a trusted circle of first readers.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that relationship with that trusted reader and how it's shaped your writing process and your revision process?
Well, my wife and I met in grad school back at Syracuse, got engaged in 3 weeks, and we're off to the races. So we've been reading each other's work for years, and she's just an amazing, wonderful person who knows me the way a wife knows a husband. So, you know, the bullshit won't fly. So if I'm doing as I think you often do, even in late drafts, you do a little bit of sleight of hand. You don't want to go to a certain place. You know, maybe you're trying to get by on wit instead of truthfulness. She'll give me a really straight reading of that. And for me, the barometer is she's either moved or she isn't. And she doesn't fake it. She doesn't truck in any kind of dishonesty. So if she comes out and goes, yeah, that was it. Or sometimes she'll leave me a post-it. And one time she said it was tears. That was it. So then it went off. So for me, that's fantastic because she reads fiction the way I hope I do, which is it's either emotional and valid and brave or it's a failure. Or not a failure, but you need to go back and work again. Yeah.
Does she point you in the directions, or does
Yeah, sure. Sometimes there's line edits, and sometimes she'll just say, you know, I think the ending, I don't know. And you know, as most writers are our self-esteem is not that great anyway. So when somebody says that, you already know. Like you're already, oh yeah, I know. Although usually for me, there's a few days of going, I don't know why I show anyone my work. Oh sure, she's pretty, but you know. And then somewhere along the line, about day 3, I go, yeah, that's true, of course, you know. So it's a great. And then I send it to Deborah Treisman at the New Yorker, and then she kind of, we go into a mind meld, and she shrink wraps it, you know, and it's fantastic. So it's a great system, you know.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have a couple of readers whose opinions matter to me, although I wouldn't say that they respond necessarily with opinions. I mean, when George was describing his wife's response, I think what I trust in a reader of my work is somebody who has an almost helpless reaction, either positive or negative, to something, because that I trust that as a writer, because that's the way I sort of, you know, mediate the world myself. They're just things I'm moved by or shocked by or fascinated by that I have no say in. I also feel lucky because there are 1 or 2 people I show my work to who are not writers. They're visual artists, or they're just good readers. And I love having my work talked about or responded to through a perspective that is a little bit different than you know, literary criticism or, you know, a person who, you know, is doing their own writing as opposed to visual art, something like that.
Isn't it true that sometimes if somebody just says, then you already have 4 things to fix, you know?
Yeah.
It's true,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's funny. I have been making some visual art recently too, and I find that it's incredibly informative for me just to be in the room when somebody's looking at it. I mean, before they even say anything, I feel that also happens to me with writing, which is that as soon as I send it off, I realize what all the flaws are. You know, as soon as I can't retrieve it from the mailbox, you know. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of. I think also fielding criticism is about the joy of having things that you suspected were awful not noticed by other readers, or the sort of humility of having those same things recognized and being all right about having to go at it again and make it better.
Both of you have reputations as being exceptionally generous teachers. So I'd love to talk a bit about how you approach teaching. One of the many lines that made me laugh aloud while reading The Bill from My Father, Bernard, was the sentence where you're describing your work teaching composition and literature to college students. and how difficult it sometimes is to see the novels and poems and short stories you love become little more than tributaries draining into the mighty syllabus. So in honor of the mighty syllabus, I'd love to ask each of you if there is an author or a piece of literature that you make sure to share with your students, a work that you feel is really important for them to encounter in their development as writers.
I teach the Hemingway story Indian Camp from in our time, and I do it in this kind of diabolical way, which is, it's about, in the version I have, it's an 8-page story. So I photocopy two, and then I hand them the first 2 and make them read it in class. And then we just kind of talk for almost too long about what bowling pins has Hemingway put in the air. And it's really great because it's a close reading exercise. Yeah. Then you give them the next 2. And they're getting a little impatient by this time, but you do it again. And it's amazing the things that brings out. And by the end, you get to say, okay, this is, I promise you, this is one of the great masterpieces of the short story. We've got a page and a half left. Is it a masterpiece yet? What does he need to do in the next page and a half? And then you talk, and no one ever guesses. They haven't read it. And he blows the doors off the place. And it's a great, I had this idea that, a story is just kind of an interactive, real-time experience where I make an expectation, the reader steps up, I complicate it, kind of like a poker game. And that story is an incredible example of how he escalates every paragraph in that thing. It's a masterpiece. And of course, these days, if someone's, oh, Hemingway is a misogynist. Like, yeah, and a genius. So
one essay, I teach mostly nonfiction, but one essay that I think is really instructive, it has been for me, and it proves to be for my students, is an essay by a writer named Patricia Hampel, where you seem to be reading a memoir about her taking a piano lesson from a nun, and very soon into it, she sort of pulls back the curtain and talks about why she decided to put the details in it that she had, and why she insists on calling it memoir as opposed to a work of fiction, even though memory is fallible, and she's supplementing a lot of things she doesn't remember with imagined details. So that's been really valuable. And there's so many stories and novels and poems, but recently, I taught for maybe the 5th or 6th time Raymond Carver's What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, and I can't believe it. It never ceases to yield so much about the troublesome nature of love, and yet remain always mysterious. I feel like I've never read it before. Have you
ever taught that in combination with the Lish version, the cut down?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was going to be my next question.
Shitstorm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And also, I think his story Lish cut was called The Bath in one book. Oh, and then became A Small Good Thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it's weird, because when you were reading about the smell of roast beef, which I loved in the book and also loved hearing you read, I thought about that story, because there's that very small consolation at the end of the story of these people who've put each other through hell, opening up a loaf of dark, warm bread. And it's just the most, it's so beautiful at that point. But, as was the case in your story, it just brings you back to some very fundamental earthly comfort.
I tell you, I'm going to teach your story next semester. That was an amazing discovery. So beautiful. And you're asking us about not knowing, but I think you know something about it, because that story is so full of beautiful surprises and twists, and So anyway, just a little shout out there.
Also, another shout out is that I had the pleasure recently of hearing Sarah read a story from a new collection she's working on, and you said, I hope this is a fair paraphrase, but you said that you began writing this series of short stories believing that you were writing a fable, but not knowing what fable you were rewriting until you got well into the story. And that was something that I thought was a beautiful effect of the story itself, which is that it had that sort of otherworldly sense of a fable, but one could never quite identify it. And that was part of why the story was so completely mesmerizing, I think.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm really
Yeah, you
blushing
can't go
now.
undercover for only so long.
But you know, one of the things I think that both of you really share in your approach is this sense of letting the language guide you through the story, and that the story is really built sentence by sentence. George, you had talked really beautifully about language being the generative force in your storytelling process. And I loved how you described how if sentences are jangly and interesting, I know how to proceed. The whole thing has a kind of charge to it. And that is what produces plot and produces
Yeah,
theme.
for me, that's true.
And without that jangle, nothing gets produced at all. So my big, tough pedagogical question is, how do we help our students, and how do we help writers starting out on this journey? How do we help them identify that kind of jangle and that kind of energy at the level of the sentence? It doesn't seem as straightforward as teaching narrative structure or character development or how to manage point of view, but it seems so much more important than those
one
things.
thing I've noticed is that that's not true for everybody. So I have students who proceed on a totally different direction. You know, their language isn't a thing, but for them it's helpful to think in some other terms. So for me, one of the real challenges over the 15 years of teaching is to say, wait a minute, this is how you do it, but that's not how she does it. So let's listen to how she does it. And then really, however, whatever floats the boat is legit, you know. So it sounds like a South Side thing. Yeah, whatever floats the boat is legit, for sure. That's fucking for sure. There's no question. So part of when I was younger, I thought, I've got to teach them to edit like I edit. And then as you get older, you think, no, actually, I got to listen for about a year, you know, and see how they get the magic that we know they have because we chose them. We got, this year, 566 applications for 6 spots. So they're already great. So then it's like, oh, shut up for a year, see if she will or he will teach you about their secret little process thing, and then you bring that to bear later. So that was an interesting thing that it may not be language for some people. I think for some people it's totally abstract conceptual things that I could never work with, but for them, it's how you get the magic. So it's mysterious, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there are writers even who I've come to sort of late because their work didn't seem generated by language to the extent that I often respond to. I'm embarrassed to say it, but even Alice Munro, who I think is a genius, it took me years to understand what she was doing because the stories seemed so matter of fact for so long. And, until I had the patience to really sit with it and realize how daring and amazing and unpredictable her stories are, I didn't quite get it. But I do, I think that's what I respond to in both your work and in writers like Grace Paley or Deborah Eisenberg. I almost feel like I'm reading a foreign language and I understand it.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of music that is, always sort of keeping me on my toes. And one thing I like to do on occasion, too, is bring in poetry for my students to read. And I think, especially with nonfiction writers or memoirists, it's really not a surprise that a lot of writers like Mary Carr, who teaches at Syracuse, began as poets or still are poets. That sense of the way to say something, the kind of inherent music of some sort of disclosure can be a beautiful thing that really makes the text exceptional.
Yeah. The one thing I noticed is sometimes, I heard that Dostoevsky was a real clunky writer in Russian, and some of the translations pick up, and they're kind of repetitive. And I noticed in my own reading that you'll be reading and a resistance will appear. Like, come on, you just said that, And I don't think that's necessarily fatal. It's kind of part of what, it's almost like on a date, God, he's talking about himself a lot, But, all right, so then you're waiting for him to kind of cash in on that somehow. Like, maybe he'll say, I'm talking about myself a lot. And then suddenly you're maybe charmed, okay. So I think with prose, there's a lot of that where you think, this is really sloppy writing. But you just put that in a debit column. And if the person then redeems it somehow by, in spite of that sloppiness, moving you, then suddenly it all becomes an asset. Or like with David Foster Wallace, I always thought, he'll go on those incredible side room things. And about the 4th time he does it, I always cave. Like, all right, he's going to do that, and it becomes a net positive. So it's really interesting the way that prose charms in so many different levels. You know.
I remember once, I mean, I love David Foster Wallace, especially his essays, but I remember once reading that an editor had written him a note that said, just how much reader irritation are you going for? Which I thought was fantastic.
But it's funny because on the other side of irritation is submission.
It's bliss, right?
Yeah. And if there's enough intelligence in the thing, then you go, oh, wow, this is obviously worth it. Just like I had a friend in high school who was so obnoxious and loquacious and aggressive and so smart that you would wait through the insults. All right, because you knew he would always deliver. So I think that's one of the wonderful things about teaching at this level is that they have abundant charms or they wouldn't be there. Yeah. And you kind of know what their charms are. And the trick is, in the 3 years, to try to urge them up into what I think of as the iconic space, where they're doing what only they can do. Yeah. And that's cool because it's not a given that they could get there. It's almost, it's very hard. And so it's kind of psychological work, and it's kind of cheerleading work, and it's sometimes even, and I had it happen to me, the work is to be ignored, or to be kind of somebody to be brusque with you, or to refuse to be moved by your cheap writing, so that then you have to go back to the drawing room. So it's really fun. Great. Yeah.
And what can seem like a tick or a mistake or sloppiness in a piece of writing can actually sometimes be a key to what makes it wonderful and idiosyncratic. Yes. I mean, this is one of the things that's funny about teaching, and I feel like every time I sort of issue a pronouncement on what you should or shouldn't do in a story, I then kind of immediately need to contradict myself. And one of the cases of that is that, a conventional piece of wisdom that's often dispensed in creative writing classrooms, and that I have been guilty of dispensing, is the whole notion that, generally speaking, in short fiction, the author should commit to a single point of view, and that the short story as a compressed form just isn't capacious enough to accommodate multiple perspectives. But in 10th of December, some of the most moving stories in this book are stories that inhabit multiple points of view. Puppy and 10th of December, there's these really unexpected shifts where we get to occupy the consciousness of a character that we weren't expecting to occupy. Can you talk a little bit about how those stories developed and about what are the challenges of switching perspective? And then I want to bring Bernard into this conversation because it's so interesting to me with nonfiction how there's an assumed singularity of point of view there, and how do you negotiate that? How do you create room for other perspectives within that? So,
but I always, the thing I realized at some point was that there really aren't any can'ts. You cannot, but there's a cost. There's like a little, in a cab, there's a fare. So if you switch point of views, you kind of have to give away a couple points. People don't like it. I don't like it. You're getting in one person's head and suddenly there's a change. So I tell my students that's all right. Just remember you have to pay for that a little bit. And so when, just like with the cab, you pay a little extra, you expect your bag to be in the trunk when you arrive. So likewise, when you this metaphor is going to get thin really fast. But see, when you do something, when you do a flashback, it costs you a couple points. When you do a point of view change, it costs you. It's all right, but you just better make sure that it's worth it. So a lot of these stories, what I found was that I would be proceeding, get stuck, and think, I can't get out of this. This is like a Houdini thing. I've got to find a different way. And often, only as a last resort, you plop a second person into it. Then that would give you a little room to breathe. But then you were set back a little bit, and you had to sort of make it up to the reader because it cost you a few points. So interesting to think that there's nothing you can't do, but also there's nothing that doesn't cost you. Yeah. You're really trying to engage your reader in real time, and if you do something difficult, it's like at the beginning of the Metamorphosis when Kafka says, when Gregor Samsa found that he'd been transformed into a bug, nobody ever goes, no, he didn't. That's impossible. I'm leaving. They go, okay, Franz, I'll give you that one.
Right.
Now you make it worth my while. I'm going to be really pissed off at you. And so I think that's maybe a useful kind of way to think of your reader. They're for you, but they are also watching you pretty closely, and it's a give and take.
One of the things I love in a lot of your stories, too, is that there's an omniscient point of view, but it's not a detached omniscience. It's a kind of empathy that drops into characters I mean, it plunges into them in this really exhilarating and often moving way.
I would think of that as a third-person ventriloquist,
Uh-huh.
where
Yeah.
you know, it's like traditional stream of consciousness, but when you go in, you sort of sign a thing that says, "I will adopt your grammar and syntax and neuroses," and you know,
Right.
and then
Right.
you try to quickly go into that character's voice and stay in there for a while.
I also, in regard to teaching, when you were saying that, every rule that you pronounce, you can also find a contradiction to. It's part of the whole theme of this, which is not knowing. I mean, I've so many times what I've thought was a rule that could not be broken has been broken beautifully. And
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes really simple, stupid thing. One of my favorite lines of Dennis Johnson's is a line which is, the sun showed through the fog like a sponge or an orange. And I thought, that's the kind of thing where you would say to a student, no, you have to choose one. It can't be both.
Right. Or neither of those.
Exactly. But it's wonderful to read work that breaks rules. I mean, I think David Foster Wallace did that all the time.
Yeah.
His work is sort of a compendium of how to break rules, with aplomb.
There's a great song. There's this, I think a duo or a trio from the 30s, and the Zurich sisters. Anybody hear of them ever? They were yodelers from somewhere in the Southwest, very poor, and they had this yodeling gift. And the song is called "The Arizona Yodeler," and it is a masterpiece. It's like 2.5 minutes, pure escalation. They start, and no content. It's like some silly song about this yodeler. But they start yodeling, which is pretty impressive at all, yodel. Then they do like double, triple harmony yodels. Then they start making these weird guttural noises out of their little southwestern throats. And it's just like, and the thing is, it's 2.5 minutes of pure ass escalation with no content whatsoever. And I played it for my class, and everybody was just laughing and kind of tears of kind of like joy, because they're breaking every rule. It's not about anything. It's not interesting. It's stupid. They're making fools of themselves, and you just can't resist it. It's just you think, wow, they know the rules, and they are breaking every single one of them in 2.5 minutes.
It's funny you bring that up, because a lot of times music is something that gives me permission to break rules, and especially sort of the newer. I mean, I love electronica, but a lot of the newer music that I'm listening to seems to start with these overlong beginnings, or it suddenly changes pitch, or there's a way in which often music, I find, gives me permission or excitement about the idea of going against the rules in some way.
Can I ask you a question about this not knowing thing? Because I loved your memoir, Bill for My Father, so much.
Thanks.
And I'm wondering, but I mean, there's a book that you're writing based on things that happen. So in approaching a book like that, how does the surprise or the not knowing manifest? Because basically what happened. But
Basically. But I first of all, I mean, I think that the act of remembering, it's not a passive act, and the imagination comes into play with incredible frequency. Also, I do like the idea that there is a kind of safety net of some basic story. And what that does for me is it allows me to concentrate more on the language. I'm going to try a little digression, but one of my favorite American painters, Jasper Johns, talked about how he liked to paint things that everybody already knew, like targets and flags, because it allowed him to paint them in a way that was incredibly off the wall with a wax material called encaustic. But I like the safety net, the sort of foundation of a story. But how you get from point A to point B is, I mean, it feels like groping through the dark to me. And also, I think one of the misnomers about memoir writing and a lot of nonfiction is that a writer has a memory fully formed, and they come to the page and find a way to translate onto the page. But often, what one remembers are these very vague snippets, and what's lovely and kind of a privilege about writing is that you can go over them and cull an incident from these vague memories that you know, and how you will do that is always mysterious. And what it means is always mysterious, too.
One of the things in that book that blew my mind was that swerve into the Oxford material. And that seemed like, it reminded me so much of this, one of my favorite novels, of Fans Notes, where just in the sense that you've got an America, and suddenly this America that you really know, that you've never seen in print, is there. Like that description of the little house in Oxford was just mind-blowingly good, really, really wonderful. And I thought, too, that you did a lot of, I feel like I know that father character intimately, as if I'd read a first-person section, which, of course, I hadn't. But that was an interesting point of view thing you did, because I know his story, and I know how he would defend himself and so on. It was really well done.
I think one of the things that, I feel like a lot of your stories are really voice-driven. And one of the things that was sort of lucky in that book was that I had imitated my father, not entirely kindly, for most of my life.
Yeah.
And I felt that I had his, I still do. If
Can you do a little before, sorry?
I can still hear his response to things.
Ventriloquism.
Well, this is
Yeah.
actually something I tell my students, because one of my items of shtick in teaching is that your job is to charm by whatever means necessary. How do you usually charm? If you're trying to seduce somebody or get out of trouble, explain yourself, what mode do you go into? And often they go, well, I don't know. And I said, well, can you do your mother? Huh. Can you do your father? Oh, God. And that's a great intro to voice writing, because that's a voice that you can't even help doing. You hear you're doing it in your body, actually, most times. And it's a great, because in other words, it should be easy. It should be somebody you know, or maybe someone you can just spontaneously invent, but you go with the parents and they.
Great exercise.
Yeah.
Speaking of that swerve from into Oxnard, how we sort of the house in the Hollywood Hills is so beautifully drawn, and then when the father has to give that up and move to the trailer park in Oxnard, it's heartbreaking, and it brings me to one of the rules, the unspoken rules that both of you break in your writing.
Don't write about Oxnard. That's take that to the bank. Sorry.
But this reluctance to write, frankly, about class and money and how people make their livings and scarcity and striving. I mean, in the Semplica Girl Diaries, which we got to hear an excerpt from, this father, this character, his ongoing struggle to provide a certain lifestyle for his daughters was just devastating to me to read that. It just rang so true. And I experienced a similar moment of recognition and Bill from my father when, Bernard, you go to New York City, you're receiving the Penn Hemingway Award. I mean, it's one of the greatest triumphs for a writer, and you come home and you've charged so much on your credit card in just those 3 days that you have to take on 2 additional classes to your already heavy teaching load. And I just feel so grateful for that kind of candor about work and money and the pressure it creates in our lives. And I wonder why we don't see this represented more often on the page. Why is this the stuff that so often happens off stage? And why do both of you choose to bring it on stage in your work?
That's a great.
It is, talking about money, it's a taboo, like talking about race. I mean, it's a sort of charged thing. One of my favorite essays, actually, I don't know if she's here tonight, but a local writer named Megan Daum wrote an essay specifically about how she spent money when she was living in New York. And it's completely fascinating to have someone really sort of lay bare the way one thinks about money when they don't have it. And it's fascinating, and I also think it's an incredibly moving thing. I mean, one of my favorite novels is Mrs. Bridge, by somebody help me here.
Evan S. Cannell.
Yeah, Evan S. Cannell.
That's why you're
and,
modern.
And it's about a wealthy woman, but that's her tragedy. In a sense, is her
wealth.
Wealth,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's so many. That's one example of hundreds, but it seems completely connected. What happens to a person financially, what they want, what they get, what they don't get, with who they are.
And in America, it's kind of that the pressure of wanting to have it and not being able to talk about it. You know, I did I did some nonfiction pieces for GQ, and the first one, they offered me kind of a lot of money to go to Dubai and hang out in Dubai. So I was nervous I'd never written nonfiction. I hadn't traveled in a while. And also I thought, hadn't met the guys yet. I'm like, GQ. You know, and so I go over there, and we had charged our credit cards. That's how we rolled. You know, we just charge our credit cards and overcharge them. So, but they had a cash advance, so they would give you $5,000 to pay for everything. But somehow it didn't come through. So I got over to Dubai, and I was staying at that Burj Al Arab, which was $2,500 a night. You know, so that I go in, and I know that my credit cards are full. And I'm trying to get the cash, but you can only get something like $750 a day from the ATM over there in Dubai. So you go in and they fan you, literally they fan you, they spray you, they give you dates, and there's not even a check-in desk because that's too lowly, you know. So you go up to your room, it's this, you know, two-level thing, you know, and the woman is a Moldavian, beautiful Moldavian. She says, "No, if you don't mind, we might have to just discuss the arrangements," like the arrangement. And so I instantly go into Southside mode, like, yeah, the thing about the arrangements is, I do have it, but I'm gonna give you $750 now, and then about 8:30, you know, and she just looks horrified. So anyway, so the point was that there's this thing, and I'm thinking to myself, this is never going in the article because it's embarrassing, and the GQ guys will think I'm, you know, like from the Beverly Hillbillies, and then it plays out, and I can't get to $750. So they're calling my room. Is there a difficulty? Whoa, you don't even know they have it. And so finally, by day 3, I'm basically under the bed, not answering the phone. But then I thought, oh, I've just got to write around that. I got to leave it out. And then, of course, you get home, your shame recedes, and you think, that's the story. You know, I'm over there to talk about this glamorous thing, feeling pretty good about myself. The city built by slave labor, and my class came to get me, you know. So then the question is, do you want to write a shitty piece or a good piece? I'll go with the good, you know. And that becomes a linchpin for the whole thing. So it's interesting how it's not really a choice when you get, you know, if it's in your face, you got to kind of use it, I think. You know. But it came out all right.
Also, they released you.
Actually, it was one of the most hallucinogenic moments. As I'm doing this, I look down at the paper, and the Dubai paper says, "American businessman jailed for non-payment of hotel." I'm like, this is a psychic newspaper. Right? I'm not a businessman, you idiot.
Yeah, Sarah was mentioning the Semplica Girl Diaries, which is such a beautiful story in George's book. And one of the things that I loved about it was that it seemed to have a lot to do with the way capitalism creates longing. And there's so much desire in that story to have what can't be had. And it's funny, and it's so resonant in so many ways. But I do think that finances are weirdly connected to emotions for everyone.
Aren't they ever? Yeah. Capitalism plunders the sensuality of the body. That's my other auto quote. Terry Eagleton, you know.
Well, I have so many more questions to ask, but I really want to include the audience in this conversation. So we'll...
Yes, she does.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your wisdom. One quote by Hemingway, just write one true sentence, the truest sentence that you know, kind of helps me sometimes if I hit a roadblock or stumble. Is there any very simple things that you have to remind yourselves when you're writing?
For me, it's just entertain. Seriously, you know, don't you're not trying to be a smarty pants. You're not trying to educate. You're not trying to execute a concept, but you're really trying to get the person on the line and not let them off. You know, by any means necessary, and because without that, nothing else happens. You know, if they put down the book at sentence 3, your theme is, you know, it's just floating out there somewhere. It's just,
Sort of along those lines, Raymond Carver is also a writer who writes about the process of writing really lucidly, and he said writers don't have to be the smartest people on the block. And that really relieved me of the sense that, you know, if you, I mean, all genres, I guess, are the terms are problematic. But when I think of myself as an essayist, you know, there's a kind of weight that I have to rid myself of if I'm ever going to write a word. And, you know, I try to remind myself that I'm not teaching or preaching when I write.
How do you manage distraction, particularly with the internet barrage and your classes and everything else, to find the quiet time you need to write?
Well, we live up in the Catskills, and there was a tool shed that was about 300 feet away, so we finished that. And so now the joke in our house is, he's the only tool in the tool shed. But it's just outside of internet range, and so you can't get it. You just so really the act is, if you just walk out there, then you've got your morning, you know. And then teaching for me, really, it's not, honestly, it doesn't distract me. It's a focuser. You know, if I have 12 hours a day to write, I spend 6 hours writing and 6 hours messing it up. But if I have the limit of teaching, it somehow speeds things up. And also being around the students is very cool and very good for me, so.
I do think it's sort of incredible how many writers I know do wrestle with the distraction of the internet and email. And I remember there used to be a day when I would wake up in the morning and drink coffee and write, you know, as opposed to opening my email, and I keep telling myself I won't. But there are so many stories I've collected recently about writers who find ways to trick themselves into not looking on the internet. In fact, somebody here tonight was telling me at one point about a program called Freedom, which weans you off the internet. And she was very excited because she thought it would allow her lots more time to write. And after a couple of months, I said, so how's that Freedom program going? And she said, well, you know, you can disable it just by pushing a button. You know? So, but it's weird that we're all trying to get ourselves a little bit clear.
You know that great writer Linda Berry, and she's a wonderful teacher. And she came to Syracuse, and she told us that she'd been in conversation with some psychologists, and they did a study that showed that the way you played as a kid is related to your pattern of self-interruption as an artist. So, for example, if you're somebody whose mom would check on you every hour, you will tend to get up every hour and self-interrupt. And I noticed that, you know, I have this inner nun thing where if I do something that I like, I can't go on. I have to stop. You know, Mr. Saunders, get up and stretch your legs. You know, and that's the danger. That's when I would go to the internet. Is when I was like, oh, that was good. You're allowed to take a break, check the internet. 7 hours later, you resume. But it was interesting. You know, for my students, we talk about sometimes like, well, how do you self-interrupt? How do you self-reward when you're doing something? Were you a kid who was allowed to play in unbroken stretches? And I think it's really related to the way that you succumb to distractions.
I have a question, George.
Okay, Mark.
It's about the particular versus the historical. In your pieces, you have this wonderful sense, jangling sentences, electric moments about roast beef, about wood flutes on a berm, firewire that we've had the pleasure to hear tonight. And at the same time, I also notice sort of an absence of historical moments. You know, occasionally, like in Home, you have a mention of 2 wars. And I'm curious why. Is it an aesthetic? Is it unconscious? Is it an anxiety? Where does history play a role in your fiction?
That's a great question. I'll have the answer at 4 o'clock this morning. No, you know what? Here's what I think. I do, maybe as a child of the Kmart realist, you know, that era, I have a little bit of an aversion to putting, say, real brand names in. And I think part of the reason is this. Okay, if you're trying in your fiction to somehow simulate the experience of being alive, or use that simulation as some kind of jangle inducer, then, okay, so what is it like in the real world when, for example, you're on a picnic and you bring a bag of Cheetos, and you're in a beautiful pine grove, and there's the orange bag of Cheetos. Now, at some level, it's a thrilling visual spectacle. You know, you see the trees, you think Tolstoy, there's a Cheeto with that cheetah who somebody recently told me I look like, thank you very much. But but there's that. And so what's the actual experience is in that split second before, it's this kind of strange juxtaposition of nature, weird orange bag. So my thing is, if you say we were on a picnic and we brought some Cheetos, that doesn't do justice to the actual visceral moment. But if you say we were on a picnic and we brought some flaky fucks, what's a so suddenly and any reader knows that a flaky fuck is a snack. At some level, they know it's something that what is that? We don't know. In the same way that the historical person who first heard the word Cheeto went, what? So I think it's some way of kind of taking it out of history, taking it out of time, but trying to just go back to the Platonic moment that happens in that half a second when we actually perceive. I'm not sure that makes sense.
Also, that the story in which these two salespeople selling a kind of mysterious object start congratulating the main character for being in the war, and they ask if it's the war that's going on or the one that has been, or aren't there two going on? There was some kind of incredible dislocation that felt, to me, the way it feels to be completely overloaded in a blizzard of information, where the sources are really decentralized. There's, for a society in which technology gives you instantaneous access to everything, everything feels like a rumor. Everything has this like tinge of unreality. And I felt that that's what you captured really beautifully when these boys are trying to figure out which war the main character had been in.
Right, and if they said, were you in Iraq or Afghanistan, that kind of suddenly it becomes clear that it's now. But I think so much of this stuff is kind of just at speed. You're approaching it and you're doing that optometrist thing, like, is this better or is this better? And I think the minute that I start saying conceptually this is better because of the patriarchal blah, 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 then I know I've already missed that moment, So it's just like, like that. You know what I mean?
I was just, I was thinking about the wrestling match that writers go through to produce work, to write work, and then to edit that work. And the struggle I go through as a writer in terms of reading and both, the tidal wave of books that's always coming out, many of them that are wonderful, and plus all the historical stuff that I haven't gotten around to yet. And I just wonder how you guys deal with just reading and how you choose what to read that's coming out. Do you wait a couple months or years till it, until it sort of is proven to be worthy of your time, or like what's sort of, whatever I've just asked.
Yeah, it's a great question.
That's a great question.
There's a lot to sift through. Nabokov said that you can only know a few books really well. And if Nabokov said that, then it's good enough for me. And so I read new work when I can, when I move to do so. There's a lot of student work I have to read. But also I reread. It's incredible. There are books I reread until they no longer produce the sort of amazement they once had. And I have to put them away for a long time and then come back to them. But I love the idea that there are a few books I can always go to, and it sounds weird, but that's the best I can do. It would be impossible to keep up with everything.
I always tell my students there's public reading and there's writer reading. So public reading would be, you should read everything. That would be the best, you should do that. But in an experience, as a writer, you're kind of reading pretty aggressively, and so you're reading something going, no, you don't, and throwing it away, or you're saying, I should read all these writers, but I'm not going to because it doesn't help me. So I think for me, one of the big steps was to go, because I wasn't very well educated. I was an engineering major, so what I don't know is like a whole wing of the library. I just only read Henry James for the first time last year, So that's a great treat in late life to go, oh, Susan Sontag, who's she? And then you go, well, she's really good. But also I think for a writer, you have to be a little bit aggressive and say, I can't read everybody, but if I'm lucky, I'll find the 2 or 3 books that feed me, and then I'll investigate that lineage back. So if you read Hemingway liked Isaac Babel liked, and then you're reading a lineage that's sort of familial to you and essential,
Also, I find that if I read a writer who is incredibly stimulating, with Alice Munro, for example, after I finally got what she was doing. I read I went on an Alice
Binge.
Munro spree.
Yeah.
So that's another way that I approach it, where I want to go deeper rather than broader with a writer's work.
Yeah.
Do you, on the title here of that get together, whether you ever start writing not knowing where you're going. I mean, you start. I'm gonna with a basic idea, but you really don't know where it's going to go, and you explore something. You just for your own interest in a way, for your own interest, like what does this mean to me? A character or something, somebody you know, and you want to write about him, and you think, who is this person? I'm going to start writing and see who this person is. So that's really not knowing, and what you do with that. Do you try to make a conclusion or just an exploration?
Well, for me, I try to always start with the smallest thing, the least freighted with capital M meaning. Because if I don't, I veer off into that Gerald Stern thing of writing this story about two dogs, So I think to start with a simple thing, and what I love is I lived up in upstate New York, and there was a barber in our town, and I was waiting for a bus across the street, and he was one of these guys who checks women out fearlessly, and even after they bust him, he keeps looking, and so we had just had two daughters, so I was a new feminist, and I thought, what an irritating asshole. Why is he, so I thought, I'll write, my first idea was, I don't know what I'm going to write, but I'm going to nail that guy. I'm going to really, So I did, and I wrote some really, I thought, fun kind of inhabiting of this perverted guy, which was surprisingly easy, which I was troubled by. But so I did that for about a year, and I had some pretty funny bits, but the story stalled. And I think it was because I knew too much. I was going to crucify this idiot. That was my plan. So the story said, all right, go ahead, but you're not going to be interesting doing that. So then at some point, about a year into it, I went, you know what, I got to somehow make this guy more sympathetic, because as this story stands, it's just kicking him, So then it's the magic moment when you go, okay, how do I make this asshole more interesting? Well, and then you start titrating in bits of yourself, which you were already doing, but now you're being a little more sympathetic. So not being the most subtle writer, I said, oh yeah, he doesn't have any toes. That was my way of doing it. But that did the trick. So suddenly he was a guy who was a pervert, that's the way we say it in France. he was a pervert, and he was a jerk, and the poor guy didn't have any toes, And so then suddenly it came alive. So I didn't know that I was out to humanize him, but the story teaches you that the story is very stubborn, and it will say, go ahead, write as much as you like, but I'm not moving until you show a little sympathy, So that was very interesting, And that can happen again and again, I think.
I just want to second that idea about not beginning writing with capital M meaning. And Flannery O'Connor once said that a lot of students whose work she saw started with some big idea that they wanted to impart to the world. And she said it takes a writer a long time to understand that you start off usually on a very sort of humble level when you're writing, like let's get someone in a room or something like that. But to your question, one of the things I love about essay writing, about the whole endeavor, is that that's what it is. It's sitting down, often not exactly knowing what you're going to say. And it's, a good essay is being able to watch a mind and a heart sort of explore what it's thinking and feeling. And this is a kind of weird side issue, but I'm very disappointed that the publishing industry is very hard-pressed at this point to publish collections of essays, because I think a collection of essays really gets to the heart at what essay writing is, that it's trying different things, it's essaying different things at different times, and the variety of it and the sense of just sitting down and seeing what happens is what makes it a beautiful form, I think.
I began a short story not knowing, and I loved where it ended. I joined a writing group because I needed help knowing what it needed, and I read my first 3 pages, double-spaced, and they said, this isn't a short story, this should be a book.
Good writing group.
I have no idea. But I'm trying to do that, but I could sure use some advice, because knowing that I loved where the short story ended, I know too much, and I'm very perplexed. Anything you have to say, I would appreciate.
Well, as someone who's written 0 novels, I can't. No, one thing that might be the case is that that story is complete, and does it produce a tendril? You know, is there something is there a question that story raises that's interesting, that is as interesting to you as that was? Then maybe put that down and let it go from there, I think. But I think if you felt like, my thing would be if you felt like that was complete, you could easily expand for expansion's sake, and look up and 5 years had passed, and then if you're like me, you would revert to the original 3 pages. And then, yeah.
Also, if you're not motivated to do it, I mean, a book-length manuscript is such a sort of Promethean undertaking, I think, that the only thing that would get you through it is that you wanted to see where it went. And another bias in the publishing world is about novels versus short stories. And there are plenty of great writers like Deborah Eisenberg or Grace Paley who did not write novels. And in fact, Grace Paley once talked about how she was convinced by somebody that she should write a novel, and spent 3 years writing a short story instead. I don't know if those kinds of questions can be answered from without.
Stuart Dybek has a great thing. He came to to Syracuse, and he said, he's got a thicker Chicago accent than I do, and he said, the story is always talking to you, but you just got to learn to listen. And I think that means in terms of length and in terms of everything, the story is always giving you feedback. And mostly what we do is we don't like that. We want to be in control of it, so we override whatever the story might be saying.
Yeah.
Also, one of my favorite quotes, because a lot of times students are in a quandary about how long something should be, or whether they should continue with something or just leave it a certain length, is a Willa Cather quote. When somebody asked her how long a short story should be, she said, "As long as a piece of string." Which is incredible.
Perfect.
I mean, it's
Perfect.
just so incredible.
If I could just chime in it's sometimes when I hear that feedback from a workshop, this should be a novel, I think sometimes readers are expressing 2 things. One is their admiration and excitement about what they've read, but I think also perhaps wanting more, or a dissatisfaction somehow, that they have questions still. And I think in some cases it's possible to address that longing or that dissatisfaction, or to answer those questions your readers might have within the scope of the story. And so it's maybe a case of going back to your writers group and saying, what were you longing for when you said this can be a novel? What did you want to see more of? Because it's very possible that you can address that and meet that still, while still maintaining the integrity of this story that you first fell in love with.
Great advice.
Also, writing workshops are strange beasts. And one of my favorite lines by Billy Collins is in a poem called Workshop, which is, maybe you have 2 poems here, or 3, or none.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Well done,
Thank
sir.
you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you to